This film is about Richard Brock, who sadly died at the age of 86 at the end of 2024. Richard was the series producer of David Attenborough's first series for the Natural History Unit, and later on he went on to leave the BBC and make his own conservation films. Richard lived in Chew Magna for over 50 years, and I knew him for 40 of those years, both as a colleague and a neighbour. Richard was a very private man going about his business in the village. He was often seen, even on cold days, wearing baggy shorts and either flip-flops or Crocs on his feet, a very distinctive look. He was an easy man to like, warm and witty with buckets of charm, whether catching up with Moira in the post office or chatting to the staff in the co-op. He always had time for a joke and a wave as he picked up his daily papers to keep up with the latest news. So tell me, Moira, how long did you know Richard?
Oh, I worked for him for about 8 years or so, but I knew him before that.
And what was he like?
Very amenable person, really kind and thoughtful as well.
And in terms of technology, how did that work?
Yeah, he had no techie knowledge at all.
So what sort of thing did you help him with? What did you do?
I could explain things to him, but he had absolutely no idea.
Right, so what sort of stuff did you do for him?
Typing, emailing, research, all sorts of things. And the book. Typed the whole of the book.
You typed the whole of the book? Wow. And what did you think about Richard's message? About how important did you think it was?
He's really passionate about life and the people in general, wildlife especially, and conservation. But he didn't want to come across as though he was preaching, but he wanted people to think about what he was saying.
Richard enjoyed sharing his passions, which were always about the natural world and our impact on it. He was increasingly worried about the state of our planet and the lack of action by our politicians. I interviewed him here at his cottage in April 2021, just before publication of his book, Planet Crunch. And I'll be dipping into that interview to allow you to hear from Richard himself. Richard's love of the natural world ran deep and started young. I asked him about his childhood and when his interest in nature started.
Born in Bristol, and the family moved to near Exeter, South Devon, lovely part of the world, and I was able to go to the sea there, which is great, near Salcombe and Kingsbridge, beautiful places. And so I got interested in wildlife there at a young age. And then when I went to school in Dorset, which I did, I was very lucky to have 2 teachers there, one of which was very keen to go down to the coast in Dorset. So we used to cycle down to Poole Harbour. And then the other teacher was an excellent chap who was very keen on smaller stuff and sort of biology in a broad sense. So in a way there was no stopping me. Once I was on that track, I was on that track. And so when I tried to get to the BBC after Cambridge, then that was a good background, I would say.
Was there a particular aspect of the natural world that you were interested in?
I would say it was pretty general, but I think it's quite important to try and incorporate some of the smaller animals. And until you know what they are and can look at them and keep them maybe in your house, then that's really helpful.
Did you do that? Did you keep animals?
Yeah, I did.
What did you have? What was Richard Brock's bedroom like?
Well, it wasn't too bad, but I got so fascinated by some of these particularly foreign small creatures that hooked me as well.
Richard's childhood reminds me of Gerald Durrell's stories of his boyhood adventures in Corfu. I'm told all the family loved wildlife and the countryside, but Richard took it to extremes. From a young age, he kept bugs, mice and birds in every nook and cranny all around the house. Richard went to Queen's College, Cambridge to study natural sciences, but he was also very sporty and got a full blue in both hockey and squash. When he left university, he did his national service, partly in Kenya, and it was after that that he started persistently knocking on the door of the BBC Natural History Unit in Bristol. Here's Richard recalling his early days at the BBC and how he met David Attenborough for the first time.
It seemed to work because I think they got so fed up with me going to White Ladies Road and saying, oh, I want a job. And they said, well, we'll give you a temporary job, something like that. And I was effectively a dog's body. But I got suddenly, for some reason, asked to go to Television Centre in London, which of course is the headquarters of the BBC, 24,000 people, to see a chap called David Attenborough. Well, he wasn't Sir David Attenborough then. He was, in fact, Director of Programmes, which is just like number 2 after the Director General.
How old were you at this point?
Well, I suppose I was about 22, 23.
And David Attenborough had already appeared on TV. He wasn't as famous as he is now, but he was a national figure still.
Well, he was, and famously he suddenly came in front of the camera because someone fell ill on a trip. So he was already travelling and seeing amazing animals, and of course you bring these animals back, and you couldn't really do this now, but he would bring the animals back, he would present them in the studio, they usually bit him or jumped away or something, which made it even more interesting.
And you, as this young, wet behind the ears producer, researcher from Bristol, coming up to the big smoke to meet one of these top bobs, how did it go?
It went all right. I mean, I didn't know what to expect, but I do remember, well, at that time, I think it's changed now, but the television centre was a big, I think they call it donut shape, but I never know what that means. I would say polo mint shape, circular shape, and you walk across this gap in the circle, and this window opened on the 6th floor, and it was David. So he said, oh, come on up. So I went up to the 6th floor, absolutely terrified, and he had 2 fairly formidable assistants. I don't think you call them secretaries, you call them assistants. And I had to get past them, like, what are you doing here? And so David would open the door of his inner sanctum and say, come on in. And then he had these maps of Borneo on the desk. He said, look, this is very interesting here. Let's do this. And I was saying, well, he knows what to do. He's been on trips. He's the boss of TV, basically, BBC television. Anyway, that's how it started.
So which series? Was this for a series or for one programme?
No, well, it was called Eastwards with Attenborough. And I was, therefore, I don't know what I was. I mean, I was a Dog's Body Plus, in that I was with him and the crew of 5 of us, on the road for about 6 months. It was quite a big effort, really. But here was I trying to balance what I knew, which was nothing, with the great David Attenborough, who was very kind. He was very kind. And he, in the past, his way of working, as you may remember, he would just set off with Charles Lagos, who was the cameraman and his great friend, and they would set off, and as soon as they got stuck in the mud in the Land Rover, there was a sequence. So, they'd make it up as they went along. So I had this idea of trying to make it more structured. So each of the 6 films had a story through it. Fortunately, it was very successful, and, the rest is history.
The 6-part series Eastward with Attenborough went out in 1973 and began a successful relationship between David and Richard, which would see them working together again on Life on Earth, with Richard as one of the producers, and then The Living Planet, of which he was series producer. Richard, I think, saw that as the highlight of his BBC career. I'm going to show you an interesting clip from The Living Planet in a minute, but first I thought I'd show you an interview I found with David Attenborough back in 1974. He's talking about sharing his love of wildlife on television, but it's clear that even then there were concerns about the state of nature. The interviewer is Jeffrey Priest.
If I can communicate that pleasure to others through various devices like television cameras or whatever else, that is an enormous reinforcement of the pleasure for me. And I'm not proselytizing though I dare say perhaps I am unconsciously so doing, but I'm not doing it because I'm wanting to go out and tell people they ought to do something. I'm just saying I think this is enormously pleasurable and inspiring, and therefore I thought you might like to see it.
So you are taking enjoyment to people, but are you taking to them something that it is important for them to know, important for them perhaps to take some action about?
Well, to speak purely personally, I think there is a role for the programme, which is the pioneering, hard-hitting, campaigning programme. Sure, it's playing a proper role in society and all that. On the other hand, I personally can have enough of people leaning out of the television screen and saying, "You lazy, irresponsible, ignorant chap sitting there in your comfortable suburban home, why don't you care for this or subscribe to that or go out and do the other?" I mean, there is a place for that, but not for me.
There is a lot of that in nature programmes on television.
Well, I hope there's not too much. I mean, I think every now and again that it's worth reminding people that these splendid things have got to be looked after. But primarily, I think the programmes are so that people may share the delight in the things that have brought you delight.
Are you worried about conservation?
Very much.
But you don't feel that it's part of your job to take this message to people?
Oh, I do. And perhaps I am being a little, I don't know. But I actually think the best way of taking the message to the people is by showing them the pleasure. Not necessarily by saying, every time, you've got to do something about it, but by saying, look, isn't this lovely? And the other bit follows.
10 years later, Richard was appointed series producer on The Living Planet, the most ambitious wildlife series to date. 12-hour-long episodes filmed across 5 continents. The series looked at the complicated webs of life that had evolved across the globe. In the final programme, they looked at the human impact on the planet and our relationship with nature. This is how the final episode concluded.
When in prehistoric times these stones were first put up to build this temple in the west of England at Avebury, they must have been an astonishment to the local people, an amazing demonstration of how clever, how powerful human beings had become. And yet that was less than 5,000 years ago, a mere moment in the history of life. And in the brief period since then, men have gone on to learn how to build dams, how to mold animals and plants to suit their needs or their fancies, how to transform whole landscapes. Immensely powerful though we are today, it's equally clear that we're going to be even more powerful tomorrow. And what's more, there will be greater compulsion upon us to use our power as the number of human beings on Earth increases still further. Clearly, we could devastate the world. If we're not to do so, we must have a plan. And just such a plan has been formulated by environmental scientists. They called it the World Conservation Strategy, and it rests on 3 very simple propositions. 1, that we shouldn't so exploit natural resources that we destroy them. Common sense, you might think. And yet, look what we've done to the European herring, the South American anchovy, and are still doing to the whales. 2, that we shouldn't interfere with the basic processes of the Earth on which all life depends, in the sky, on the green surface of the Earth, and in the sea. And yet we go on pouring poisons into the sky, cutting down the tropical rainforest, dumping our rubbish into the oceans. And 3rd, that we should preserve the diversity of life. That's not just because we depend upon it for our food, though we do, nor because we still know so little about it that we won't know what we are losing, though that is the case as well. But it is surely that we have no moral right to destroy other living organisms with which we share the Earth. As far as we know, the Earth is the only place in the universe where there is life. Its continued survival now rests in our hands. .
It's rather sobering and quite chilling that we're hearing the same messages today and so little has changed in the last 40 years. We'll return to those concerns and how Richard felt compelled to take action later. But first, more about the man himself. It was early in his BBC career that Richard came to live in Chew Magna, and the decision to move here was all down to a compass. He was sitting in his BBC office in White Ladies Road with a map of Bristol and the surrounding area in front of him. He didn't want to commute too far, but he wanted to live in the countryside, and particularly to live near a river. With his compass, he drew a circle about 10 miles out from the BBC and looked for properties within that circle that were on a river. As soon as he found Dumper's Cottage, Richard knew Chew Magna had everything he was looking for. He told me he loved coming out of Bristol, driving over Dundry and descending into the Chew Valley. In a 35-year career, Richard went on to make many other films for the BBC, including some for The World About Us, The Natural World and Wildlife on One. It was on Wildlife on One that our professional lives crossed in 1987. Richard and cameraman Hugh Maynard went to Poyang Lake in China to film Chinese cranes. It's a remote location where the birds gather each year to perform their flamboyant ritual mating dances. Unfortunately, that particular year, the birds didn't show up, so the BBC crew were left with a bit of a problem. Well, rather than just come home with nothing in the can, Richard decided they would make a film about the local villagers and how they celebrated the cranes. Now, the problem was the film equipment they had in those days, the camera didn't record any sound, and they'd only the very basic of sound equipment. So when they got back to the cutting room, I had a bit of a problem because I was the assistant editor and one of my jobs was to put the soundtrack together. Well, I'd virtually a 30-minute mute film with lots of Chinese people talking away happily about Chinese cranes or something. Anyway, we came up with a solution, sort of, which was I contacted, with Richard's blessing, half a dozen Chinese students at Bristol University, and we brought them into the BBC. They watched the film, and we made up some things they might be saying that would be suitable. Now, of course, we don't know what dialect the people in that village were speaking. I'm sure we got it wrong, and it does kind of worry me that if that film was ever shown in China, I'm not sure how it would go down. Anyway, through this whole bizarre process, Richard was of course supportive, encouraging, and very funny. Today, we're very aware of the problems the natural world is facing, and many TV programmes don't shy away from showing that. But well into the early 2000s, the BBC had a policy of leaving conservation messages to environmental charities. The BBC attitude hadn't really changed much from those expressed by Sir David in that 1974 interview. Like the final sequence of The Living Planet, they did produce some individual programmes and an environmental series called Nature, which did look at many of the issues, but the main wildlife output was kept free of all these concerns. In part, I think the BBC were concerned about alienating a lot of their loyal audience, but there was also the belief that it wasn't the BBC's job to shift opinion. It was for others to raise concerns and reveal the growing crisis. Television, in the most part, was showing a cleaned-up version of the planet, and I remember being told that conservation was a dirty word in wildlife films. Over his years travelling around the world filming wildlife, Richard became increasingly concerned at what he was seeing. He became very uncomfortable having to show a perfect natural world with no reference to loss of habitats or threats to wildlife. I asked him when he first became worried that so many issues were not being reflected in the BBC films he was being forced to make.
I don't think it was a particular time. I think it was cumulative because, everywhere I was going and people I talked to, were noticing this. I think later on I become less interested in biology and physiology and behaviour and more about conservation. I mean, that crept in, of course, because when you realise that some of these animals, big or small, anywhere in the world, were struggling, then I got very concerned about that. And, you know, people have said, well, you were onto this, I think you've said that, before Attenborough was. Well, I think Attenborough's view was, and you have to agree, that unless people see what these things are, then you can't really start kind of lecturing them and advising them on what should be done, because they won't know what you're talking about. On the other hand, a series like Big Cat Diary, which was very successful, lots of big animals, and lions and cheetahs and leopards, very little said about what their problems might be. The Masai Mara in Kenya is a beautiful place, yes, but it's not got fences around it, but it does have a lot of people. So effectively these animals are in a sort of long lead. They're confined. And I said, you can't go on explaining this kind of paradise without explaining it. You know, because if you do, if you ignore it and you mislead the audience, then it'll be up to you. You'll have to take the blame later for not telling us what was going on.
Richard eventually left the BBC in 2006 and set up Living Planet Productions and the Brock Initiative, creating a website and a YouTube channel. He produced over 100 films and the book Planet Crunch, looking at a wide range of conservation issues in his own idiosyncratic and imaginative way, including Wildlife Winners and Losers YouTube series. For a man with an acknowledged limited technical ability, he was more than happy to embrace the power of the internet, and with the support of a very small but active team of Moira, Gareth, Jason and Penny, he got his messages out to an appreciative audience. In my 2021 interview, Richard told me about that period. You decided to take this step of setting up the Brock Initiative and the Winners and Losers films and lots of others that you've done over the years. You obviously felt that was a really important message.
Yeah, well,
to
two or three things there. One is I was very kindly, and this is not true for many people, I was left quite a lot of money by my mother and my sister, and I thought, well, you know, what else am I going to do with this? Very nice to be given a lot of money like that. So I thought, well, what I want to do, because I like doing it, is making films with a, you know, for a reason, with a message. So I decided to do that by, as you say, doing these all these films, and then eventually the book. So the book, well, and the films are a sort of legacy. Yeah, it's called Planet Crunch. This is a dummy copy. Yes, the backside, but no insult to anyone called Dave, but it's two dung beetles saying to each other, "A bigger job than usual, Dave." And here's a large elephant, and here's some tick birds. So there's a slight hint of ecology. There's some fun in it, but there's also something quite serious. So yeah. It's wildlife slanted, because one of the things, you know, it's got 19 chapters, and it goes across oil, nature, supermarkets, food, media. So what it's trying to do, which I haven't seen in any other books, and there have been quite a lot of other books of this sort, which are mainly about climate change, is to bring in biodiversity and show that in all these different ways, in these 19 chapters, we are connected. Rather than limiting our use of natural resources as our numbers increase and with it global consumption, we often destroy the very life we ultimately depend on. That's Planet Crunch. Big tools, small brain, some would say. It seems we can be our own worst enemies. The soil is potentially full of life, But if we mismanage it with chemicals, cut it to the bone, in the end it will be us who are the real losers. Another way to damage our rich heritage is to overgraze it. Livestock, be they sheep or cattle, reared for our food on cleared forests, can turn fertile landscapes into deserts. It's true underwater too. Marine life can be exceedingly prolific if it's given the chance. From scallops on the seafloor to huge basking sharks sieving tiny plankton at the surface, the whole food web of the oceans is a treasure trove that should not be pillaged for short-term gain. The problem is the gain, millions of our extra mouths to feed. Thus, overfishing. A bluefin tuna, the Porsche of the sea, is heading for a can. And so are lots and lots of shoppers. GDP, gross national product, is being considered a misleading basis of achievement for national, read natural, because that's a better measure of human success into the future. There is no question the media has publicised the plight of the planet and its nature. After all, we are nature. Nature is us. Without it, we have no chance. The elephant on the planet, not in the room, is the number of us and our consumption. It will take a major effort and drastic action to turn things round. But it can be done. But it may take a star animal, like a gorilla, to make a real impact and change. Question: where does a large silverback sit? Answer: anywhere you want. The media may have been kind to gorillas despite the King Kong image. But it has been very unkind to sharks. Indeed, some television channels endlessly reinforce the Jaws reputation. We are the so-called deadly killer assassins. That's us. Fins are eaten in China, throwing away the body, still alive, of this ancient, vital, key link in the ocean food chain. There are a lot of Chinese, and now a lot less sharks. The total human population is some 8 billion and counting. In Africa, the late Wangari Maathai hit Planet Crunch on the head.
We humans, as a species, we need the other species much more than they need us. And if other species disappeared, we would definitely not survive on this planet. But if we disappeared, there are many species which would probably say, thank God.
Along with Sir David Attenborough, a modern-day version is a young girl from Sweden, appearing here on a mural in Bristol, England. Greta Thunberg, who watches and challenges politicians and corporations to take action now, so the next generation will inherit a better planet. That includes what we do to it, what we consume more and more, especially food, often from many air miles away.
Both in the book and his films, Richard has his own particular style in bringing issues to people's attention. His highly personal commentaries and relaxed filming style, often without a tripod, mean his films are in sharp contrast to the glossy blue chip series we're used to seeing on TV. He felt that the message was the most important thing, and sometimes amazing pictures from the latest camera technology could be a distraction. He wanted to engage people with a positive message, as well as highlighting the issues. I'm going to show you a couple of short sequences from two of Richard's most recent films. The first one's about choughs, handsome red-beaked members of the crow family who were once very common in Cornwall. It's a success story, and always on the lookout for a catchy title, you'll notice that he calls it Chuffed to be Back, but totally ignoring the correct spelling of chuff.
The Cornish chough used to be a common sight amongst the sea thrift, decorating the beautiful coastline, the county bird in fact. But because its home got changed, it disappeared. But not quite. So the question is, can it come back? We'll take a close look at the chough's fortunes, past, present and future. To achieve this, we'll take literally a bird's eye view to see what's happened to its rugged home, so popular with human visitors to Cornwall. But can it appeal to choughs too in these changing times? Win or lose, this is a double story, because away from those cliffs is an exciting project based on a popular tourist attraction, Paradise Park, at Hale, near St Ives. Welcome to nest box number 2. Out there on the wild coast, choughs typically may nest in caves, and their life can be tough, coping with the elements, storms and gales at sea. But here at Paradise Park, their breeding arrangements are positively gentle. A perfect B&B, you might say, even an Airbnb, so they can fly in and out of their nests. Lovely grubs, well earned for some brilliant flying, which we hope will be achievable when the growing chicks fledge. But will they and can they? Replacements soar high and low, looking for suitable feeding places. Gorse is no good, as it covers ground suitable for that distinctive probing beak. So they must search elsewhere. Like down there in the distance, a small grassy island which might be worth dropping into. That's how it used to be a few weeks ago. But now it's getting rather too crowded. Time to move on. And out? Captive bred birds from Cornwall are now flying free in Kent and Jersey in the Channel Isles, and the aim is to expand the populations further afield over time. As every year in which Operation Chough operates, the future for the Cornish chough looks even better here in Cornwall, as our to make the best possible use of those super feathers and join the crowd in a landscape they really need.
And now a very different film. It's called Who Done It? Richard does like his quirky titles. And this one comes complete with farting sound effects. It's a detective mystery sniffing out why the Wye has become so polluted. It's part of an ongoing campaign to restore the river to its former glory. This clip comes from near the end of the film.
Some people locally are doing their best to help. As pollution of all sorts is poured into our rivers, lakes, shores and coasts, the anger is growing. More and more questions are being asked about who's doing it, indeed who done it. What sort of rivers will she inherit? Could he save us from the dreaded blanket week? Here it comes. Why did this fine fish die? Riverside Cottage should perhaps be spelt with a C instead of an S, like homicide. How true is that these days? The last sign of summer, a black, or rather brown-headed gull, finds what he can from the to and fro tidal delivery service of the Wye. In winter he will lose that brown look, scanning the surface, which now looks pretty grim. As far as his eye can see, time to move on, over the foam, to a better place, well, perhaps. But the ducks make the most of it. They're very versatile. But who done it? All that stuff that has polluted the declining Wye. Well, it turns out that's who done it. Chicken manure and more. About 20 million chickens are raised in the Wye catchment area, and more are proposed. According to the Times, those 20 million chickens are a quarter of the UK poultry population. Large corporations like Cargill and Avara pay farmers to raise chicks to slaughter weight in 6 to 8 weeks. And supermarkets, including Tesco, sell them for as little as £4.
You can find all Richard's films, over 100 of them, at the Brock Initiative on YouTube. Richard's enthusiasm, energy and charm were infectious. He was a champion of the natural world his whole life. Both by his work and his personality, he inspired many young filmmakers to follow in his footsteps. Many of today's best filmmakers have commented that Richard gave them their first job, or advised, encouraged and supported them at the start of their careers. It's thanks to people like Richard that we are now much more aware of how fragile our existence is on this planet. He was determined to show how closely we are all connected to nature and how much the way we live our daily lives impacts all life on the planet. I'm going to leave the last words in this film to Richard himself.
Very broadly speaking, if the green flavour, the green emphasis does get to the front page and feeds through to everything that happens, now that is a very grand idea, that everything we do is costed really to the planet. If you can turn it round or take it that far, there is a chance. We just have to agree to live less greedily. Greed is a basic human problem, I think, and it's encouraged by huge commercial and political demands that we respond to.
You say this is a legacy, all your videos, your book. This is, now for anyone watching this, what would be your parting thought to leave them with?
What we're saying quite urgently now, David Attenborough saying it urgently, is we've got to fix this. It's nearly too late, but we seem incapable of doing that. someone with a biological, behavioural outlook would be able to, from the moon, if you like, that detached from you, look at us as a biological system and say, well, look, these guys are going down the wrong line. You know, they're fighting each other, they're running out of resources, they're polluting the place. They've got it wrong. I think it's a question of time. It's a race against time. It's also a race against our own fabric of society, which drives us to need more, drives us to produce more children. Those children want more stuff. The planet doesn't have that stuff. So when you've run out of stuff, you've run out of planet. So that's why I'm not hopeful, to be honest. I think things are moving better, but I don't think they're going to move enough in the time we've got, really. And I think it's really sad to know that such a small percentage of wild places and wild species, you know, still exist, are still allowed to exist when we go marching on.